Do you still believe in the Rhino rush? Hello again and welcome to another Auspex Tactics review video, where we're continuing Tank Week. I'll look at the Space Marine motor pool and how best to crush the Rhinos beneath your iron treads. Quick tip, it's actually better to shoot them, tanks aren't very good in close combat. As I'm sure you've noticed, today we'll be looking at the Rhino, the Space Marine's APC of choice, for protecting valuable squads as they transit into the battlefield. In this video we'll be taking a look at the Rhino's stats and how they can best fit into a Space Marine army. In the background, the Rhinos are the machines that transport every Space Marine company aside from the 10th company, and they've been employed since the Great Crusade and are famed for their reliability, ruggedness and limited ability to self-repair. But how do they fare on the tabletop? The Rhino is a dedicated transport choice for Space Marines, so you can buy one for every individual unit in the same detachment that isn't a dedicated transport. For some reason, Games Workshop haven't specified that it has to be something that can go in the Rhino, so you could happily have, say, a detachment of several dreadnoughts, and you could buy a Rhino for each dreadnought, even though the dreadnoughts cannot fit inside the Rhino. Essentially, this means that you can take as many Rhinos as you want in a Space Marine list, unless you're really spamming the dedicated transports. The Rhino costs 65 points base and has a fairly standard Space Marine vehicle stat line. It has a movement of 12, weapon skill 6 up, ballistic skill 3 up, strength 6, toughness 7, 10 wounds, attacks 3, leadership 8, and a 3 up save. It degrades when it gets to 5 wounds, when its movement drops to 6, and again at 2 wounds when its movement drops to just 3. Its ballistic skill also degrades in the normal way, but Rhinos don't exactly have that many guns. They're equipped with just a Storm Bolter as basic, with the options to take an additional Storm Bolter and to take a Hunter Killer Missile. I think that you should always take the additional Storm Bolter. There's no reason not to buy it an additional flurry of shots. The Hunter Killer Missile I would only ever buy if I was running Master Artisans or the Salamander's tactic. Otherwise it's not likely to be worth it, as you're going to be moving this thing quite a lot. The Rhino has a few special rules. Obviously, as a transport vehicle, it can transport 10 normal Space Marine infantry of your choice, and it can't transport Terminators, Jump Pack, Primaris or Centurions. It has the Angels of Death special rule, giving it access to combat doctrines, the Bolter Discipline special rule for those Storm Bolters, and Shock Assault. It has Smoke Launchers, which allow you to forego shooting for a round to have an additional -1 to hit against enemy firepower. For a transport vehicle, these are actually incredibly useful, as they help keep it alive for longer and its shooting is only minimal, so I'd seriously consider using these on any round that you expect to attract enemy firepower. The vehicle can explode on the roll of a 6 when it's destroyed, and inflicts D3 mortal wounds on all units within 6 inches of it, and it has its signature self-repair rule, where if it's lost any wounds, you roll a 6 and it can repair 1 wound at the start of your turn. It's not really ever going to change that much, to be honest, but it's quite a fun little rule. So overall, the Rhino is a very basic, lightly armed transport. Its main value comes from its durability, and it wants to transport standard Space Marines up the battlefield towards the enemy so they can get out and lay down some bolter fire. It actually has a very good defensive profile for the points. There aren't that many units that only cost 7 points per toughness 7 vehicle wound, so having a few of these are a decent durability enhancement to your army. There are a few ways to buff the Rhino, though to be honest you shouldn't really be considering buffing the Rhino as the main goal in an army list, but there's just some armies that it's going to work with better, namely Iron Hands for 6 up Feel No Pain and better degrading profile, Raven Guard and Stealthy for the extra cover save when you're outside 12-inch range of the enemy, and Ultramarines for Bolter Discipline on the move, which can actually make those Storm Bolters pack a surprising punch for a vehicle that you're not really buying for the firepower. Also, Crimson and Imperial Fist will both also buff the damage output. White Scars also have a stratagem that will allow them to get out after the Rhino has moved, much like the new Impulsor rule. So for a command point you could have a unit get out and then shoot the enemy from extreme close range. Finally, Dark Angels and Space Wolves both have ways to access -1s to hit on the Rhino, Dark Angels through the Dark Shroud, and Space Wolves through the -1s to hit from their Rune Priests. This can combine with the unit's smoke launchers to have -2 to hit Rhinos that are very hard to shift indeed. This could be decently helpful for either transporting units or for screening characters. There aren't really too many stratagems I'd use with Rhinos. Armour of Contempt could help shield one from mortal wounds for a bit, but even if your Rhino is eating a few smites, it's not really that big a deal, because at 7 points a wound, it's better that the Rhino eats those smites than virtually any of your other Space Marine units. Rhinos have some of the lowest points per wound cost in the entire Codex. So from here it becomes more of a question of what do we actually use the Rhino for. The simplest answer would be to transport something like tactical marines up the battlefield towards the enemy to get in rapid fire range, and this is sort of what Games Workshop would intend the Rhino to be used for. Unfortunately, with the way that the transport rules work, you can't get a Space Marine squad out and shoot after the Rhino has moved like you were able to in previous editions. This means that every turn that the Space Marine squad is actually inside the Rhino and taking advantage of its longer ranged move characteristic is a turn that they can't actually contribute to the battle in any other way with shooting or melee. All that being said, I do think that the Rhino has some decent competitive uses, mainly because the thing is so tough. Firstly, you could put bare bones tactical squads or scout squads in the Rhino and use these to go and secure objectives. It's going to be a lot harder to remove your marines from an objective if they're inside an incredibly durable Rhino tank. If the Rhino survives, then the unit can then jump out of the Rhino, shoot and assault as necessary to help claim that objective. Secondly, you could use it as first turn protection for a heavy damage dealing unit. For example, if you are running Iron Hands who don't care if the heavy weapons move and shoot, you could put a big squad of Devastators in the Rhino to prevent the enemy from being able to shoot them turn 1, without having to waste a lot of their heavy weapons chewing through a Rhino first. They could then get out and shoot, and the Rhino could go off elsewhere to either help with screening or to claim objectives or anything like that. I imagine you could do something similar with company veterans or Stern Guard. You could potentially drive the Rhino into the centre of the battlefield, and then if the enemy doesn't deal with it, then you have a squad there ready to jump out, shoot and potentially assault the enemy and cause a lot of damage. I think the main reason you don't see a lot of people doing this is because you have to wait a turn with the unit doing nothing inside the Rhino, in which time the opponent has enough chance to either eliminate the threat or to counter it, either by repositioning his units, perhaps wrapping the Rhino in enemy troops so your unit can't get out, or in some other way. Thirdly, I could see Rhinos being used as very durable screening units for a Space Marine force. I mentioned this briefly before, but because they are so durable, you could put them on the forefront of your lines, so the enemy can't deep strike or otherwise get too close to your forces. If the enemy really wants to come in from reserve near your heavy hitters to do a lot of damage to them, then they will often have units that are good at removing screening units. These typically tend to be anti-infantry units for gunning down things such as guardsmen, and these won't really be very good at dealing with Rhinos, which are very durable vehicles. Another potential use for a Rhino in your list is to go forwards and take damage from the enemy. Either you could have Rhinos at the front of your army to absorb smites which have to target the closest model, or if you're playing an assault army, you could charge the Rhino in to soak up Overwatch for one of your dangerous close combat units that is a bit more vulnerable to being blown to bits by a lucky roll of enemy shooting when firing Overwatch. Overall, I think that Rhinos are a decent tool to have in a Space Marine list. With any unit that is that durable, there are going to be ways to exploit it and force your opponent to waste a lot of firepower in dealing with these units. I don't think we'll be seeing any return to the Rhino rush of old until the transport rules change. I would quite like to see it if the Impulsors rule, where the unit can get out after the transport has moved, is applied to more transports across the game. If you want to have an entire force of Space Marines with bolters inside cheap transport vehicles, and unfortunately I think that the Impulsor does this job better at the moment, with either Intercessors or Hellblasters inside. If there are any other clever ways that you've thought of using the Rhino in your Space Marine army list, then please let me know. I feel like they're a very underrated unit in the competitive scene. and there are definitely ways to exploit that very tanky stat line. Thanks very much for listening to another Auspex Tactics unit review. Please feel free to subscribe if you'd like to check out the rest of Tank Week and the unit reviews that I'm going to continue doing after this. Later today we'll be talking about the Razorback, and we may have some videos on Land Raiders coming out tomorrow. Thanks again for listening to Auspex Tactics, and I'll see you guys in the next video.